Yeah. Well, yeah, I can hear it. So the real big news of this morning is wonderful news. We have a new set of grandparents in in the church this morning. Give us a little bit of update of if
Born 236 this morning.
236. Okay.
Parents are doing well. A little baby boy,
All right.
Desmond Raphael.
Desmond Raphael.
If you know anything about the name Raphael, means God will heal.
Okay.
And if you know the story, then you know why they chose that.
Yeah. Beautiful.
So, yeah, parents are doing well.
Yeah.
Tired and resting.
Oh, that's so exciting. That's good news. So what I'd like to do is to share an idea about global missions today. I'm going to take you into a conversation that we missionaries have amongst each other. And we're really looking to find the best possible model to move forward until Christ returns. So it's part of an ongoing conversation. And at some point, Paul and others, you must jump into what I'm going to do this morning. There's something that I hear, particularly women of my wife's age. They still talk of themselves as mothers. They say, I will always be a mother. I will always be a mother. And they're already having grandchildren, but they say, I will always be a mother. And I hear a father saying that too. I always have a father's heart. Even though the kids have left, our roles have changed, but I'm still the mother. I'm still the father. And I want you to hold that image because missions has that heart. The heart of, I will always be in missions. It's a covenantal community. So what I'm going to do this morning, I'm going to illustrate to you a pretty pragmatic way, which is me basically, let's get the job done. There are people who look at missions very pragmatically. Again, so good to see you. Yeah. They're going to look at it very pragmatically, and we're going to look at that together. And then I'm going to actually hold up to you what I think is even a more brighter vision, and it's a covenantal way of looking at the mission field. We're in covenant with God's people over there. And what does that look like when you're in covenant? Go back to I'm always a mother. Even though our roles are changing, I'm still the mother. And I want us to reach that. And you are a remarkable community because we have journeyed together in Benin. You have a love for missions, for God's work worldwide. So this is a in-house missionary conversation. And you can look at Paula, Susanna, and Christina, myself, and others, and look at the Gregories as well. We have served overseas, and now we're here. So the workers do change. But should the vision stop when the workers pull back? And I'm going to say this morning, no, we should not. We should keep on keeping on keeping on. So missions is actually not diminishing, it's increasing. The amount of mission work there is today is actually greater than it was 20 years ago. We have to have a vision that has us in with the boots on, involved in that. So I'm going to give you an illustration of a city that some of you would know, Malinville. Some of you here would know Malinville. Malinville has zero attraction. You just drive through it. But it has 250,000 people. Whew, that's a huge number. 95% are in the transport industry because it's a city right up at the Niger River, right at the border. If any of you have been to Benin and have traveled to Niger, then you actually went through the town. And if you don't remember anything, that's the way it is for most people. There's nothing to look at. You just drive through it and you go on. But there's 250,000 people living there. They're Muslims. They come from Nigeria, from Niger. A lot of them are Dendi, a language in which you guys were working. Fulani, the other language of the north. 80 years, it has been entirely accessible. You can go there and do mission work there. But there have been no missionary works in Malinville. So for 80 years, we've just been driving through this mission zone, and no one has stopped and said, I see a harvest here. It hasn't happened. There are about a dozen small little churches. Of course, you can start with the Catholics, the Methodists, the Christianisme Celeste, and then you get to charismatic expressions, and then finally you have evangelicals. They're all there. But every one of them is holding a church service in French. They're singing in French, they're preaching in French, and they're talking in French. Nobody is using the language of the people of the city. Dendi or Fulani is the dominant language. How many churches are there operating in either Dendi or French? Zero. And then we go in and look at the inside of these churches, and I've been in some of these churches, and then when you look inside, they're all people who are not from the city. They're all the migrants, if you will, people who are working, who are studying, maybe from a village. So there are Christians in town, about a dozen churches, but none of them are from the city. There's zero, and I have tested this out with my colleagues, the Evangelical Baptists that work there. I said, how many of there are native-born people from the city? And they said, there aren't any. 250,000 people are living alongside of 12 churches who are not preaching and teaching or doing anything in their language. And so they're 100% accessible until recently because of the jihadist crisis, and nobody's engaging them. Now, I'm going to get to this question. Should we consider this a reached city? Is this, because there are a dozen churches there, can we say at this point, we got that one checked off, let's look elsewhere? As you can sense by my question, there's a debate here. There's a debate here, and I want to take you into that debate. Okay, so are we clear? 250,000 people, a dozen churches, nobody preaching in the language of the people of this city, and we have Christianity in town, and we have 250,000 people who are not attending that church. Zero participation. What have we got here? Now, I'm going to actually listen. We're going to listen first to those who would say, yeah, you got that problem, Benjamin, well said, but it's not our job. It's not the missionary's job to look after that. And we're going to listen to these people and because they have really good arguments. They say, well, first of all, can you realize that those dozen churches actually have denominations behind them? So actually, the denomination should be responding to that question. People from outside the country shouldn't have to ask if what needs to be done. That's their task. In fact, your country, if you look at it, Benin, a country that many of you know really well, don't you have a massive amount of Christianity in the south? It's true. Did you know that 40% of the nation calls themselves Christian? They say, well, you see, it's their job. It's the job of the churches in the south to reach the churches in the north. Here's the reality. They're not doing it. 80 years on, they're only planting French churches in Ndindi city, which is basically there for the migrant population. So at the end of the day they're saying more of the same. And our response is, okay, but there's no one reaching the Ndindi in the north. So we have a country that is on paper 40% Christian already, and there's a significant conversation among missionaries to say that mission field has already been done. The pioneers have done their work. The churches have been planted. It's up to them. It's up to them. And we challenge that. We're going to challenge that this morning because what it fundamentally says is it's their task, not ours. They have plenty of Christianity in the south. Let them basically carry that. Practically speaking, Christine and I, when we came to the mission field in 1990, there were 75 missionaries working with our mission agency called SIM, 75 adults. That's more than, double the number of our people here, and I think we could maybe reach, what are we right now, about 30 or something like that? 40, double the number, and that's the team we had. Today, Christine, how many are we? 8? What happened? The number of unreached has in what year did you come into Benin, Paul and Susan? 2007. Okay. Well, since probably 2007, the population has probably grown by 7 or 8 million in that time. And there's a massive growth taking place. When we came there, it was like 3.5 million people. Now it's 13 million. The number of people in the country, and particularly the Muslim population, is just growing and growing and growing. So the question is, how are we doing reaching the unreached? How are we doing reaching the unreached? And there are people who say, no, there are already churches in that country. It's their job to do. It's their job to do. They might cite Romans 15, where Paul says, I make it a resolve not to preach where someone else has preached. I go on to new grounds. So they may see it as, well, there's other areas we should be focusing on as missionaries. We should no longer be bringing missionaries to Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Ghana, and all those countries. We've done our job there. It's time to move on. As you can tell, I really wrestle with that conclusion. I like to explain why. I believe we need to stay on the job. The others will say, well, there's 3 phases to missions, Benjamin. The pioneers have done their work. We've grown the work, and now we need to exit the work. That's the way it works. And for them, it's like a house. You build a house, and you have planning, you have the building, and then you wrap it up. You sell it or you do what you have to, but basically you build your house and you pull away. And for many people, they think missions is like building a house in another nation. I would suggest to you it's more like building a hospital When you build a hospital, you just don't build it and walk away. You say, it's not a hospital until it has people in it, and it is running and it is functioning. And by the way, you keep bringing in new resources and new people. You have to keep a hospital going. You're not just building a house. You're building an institution that needs to be continuously sourced by people and resources. Our mission field overseas is looking like a house built, and the missionaries are walking away. And we've seen a staggering amount of missionaries, both with Bible translators and Baptists and all kinds, coming, leaving, and nobody is replacing them. And that's a real discussion that we're having amongst ourselves. So I really feel we need to stay on the job. I think World Missions needs us to think that mission and work does not actually go away. What we do, and this would be critical, if any of us would go to Benin this year, we got to think of what's the new role that missionaries need to take. We can't do what we did 25 years ago. But today, if we came in, what would we do differently? For example, where you and the Cherries work, there's no way we could work there right now. It's a security risk zone. And that's a changing world. We don't know how much worse it's going to get. Based on Nigeria, it's actually going to get quite a bit worse. Jihadism is not at all declining, it's on the rise. How do you do missions in a world like that? So the question is, what is the role, and it's going to change, so what is the new role that missionaries should have? The other one model says, well, you did your job, just leave it to the church. And the other one says, no, we cannot, we have to stay on the job. We need to find out what is our new role in the new changing situation. I've got behind me a poll, and I need a volunteer, so let's get Kyle. And I'd like Kyle to illustrate something. When in days before, if you didn't have money, in days before when you didn't have money and you had to carry water from the well, or you had to do like, you basically carried your loads like this. You would find a yoke which would look a little bit better than the one Kyle has. But this is basically how he could carry something. He could continuously be carrying that. It feels nice and, yeah. But basically, he could work all day with this particular method. This is the missionary coming in. The pioneer missionary comes in with his resources. It's heavy. He does all the lifting by himself. And in the first model, in the, do your job and then move on, he's going to look for somebody to hand it over to. He's going to want the church to be in this position. So he comes in, and he's going to go through a stage, and I need a young lad. Let's ask Lincoln to come and help us.
This is pretty heavy. What is this, like evangelism and teaching and
That's right.
church planning?
This is everything that you need in order to do that.
Funerals,
Yeah.
marriages.
Yeah. So everything that has to do with missions is now being carried by the pioneer missionary. Now let's pretend this. Let's see Lincoln as the new young church that has been planted. How well is he going to do to carry this together? He won't be able to, right? Like you can try a little bit, but basically, even though he's there in a young stage, all the carrying is still being carried by the missionary. And you see a lot of that. You see a very small little church developing, like Lincoln, but he can't carry that. The ideal is that he will grow up, and now I need another man, so we'll ask David to come alongside now. Now with David this is a more mature church. So Kyle at this point can turn to David. Lincoln, that's great, you can sit down at this point. Why don't you both carry it together, like one in the front and one in the back, and put yourself in the front, Kyle. So both of you on one shoulder, okay? And you put the load in the middle now. And this is a common, you'll see pictures of this, for example, in China. Sometimes they're on a work site where they can't get the tractors in. They actually use this method. And so what you have here is the missionary at this point is still leading. He's in a leading position, and he's co-carrying the load together. And then we see that in churches. We see the missionaries working there, and increasingly, you're going to want to change roles. So basically, just turn around, and you turn around on your shoulder like that. And now you have, the church has evolved. He's now following the leadership of the new church, okay? Now, my argument is this. It should stay this way. Your role is going to change, and your role is going to change. He's going to take on increasingly more responsibility and decisions. He's going to always be there to carry the heavy load. By the way, in this illustration, the load gets heavier and heavier and heavier because the number of unreached is getting crushingly greater than the number of Christians that are in the country. However, the first missionary vision basically says, put it all on him. Go ahead.
There you go, brother. I'm retiring. Got my home in Florida.
So this now is the portrait of the church in Benin. It's all on their shoulders. The missionary has left. He's congratulated himself on a job well done, and it's all there. So the thing that that David in particular, he's now going to say, who can help me lift the load? And that is the question that I think I've heard so many pastors saying, where have your missionaries gone? We need your help. Okay, thanks, David. Any questions so far? Any questions so far? Yes?
What is one of the reasons why a lot of the missionaries have left? Is it due to security?
Security may be a reason, and you have to take that very, very seriously. So, for example, you may have heard of the country of Nigeria and the city of Jos. It's kind of a known city because there's so many mission agencies. There were up to 3,000 expatriate missionaries working in all sorts of ministries. That has dropped down to about 150 at this point, and it has to do with jihadist attacks. And so when jihadism attacks, you have a number of ministries all moving into the city, but you have a lot of others closing down. And when they relocate to other places, and when they relocate, then other ministries that kind of depend on a good number of missionaries, they start to collapse. So an illustration is my own son. My own son was working in Niamey, the capital of Niger. Many of you may know where that is. And he was there, but he could not leave the city because of the jihadist crisis in the countryside. And then they had a coup d'etat. You may have heard of that as well. And it just got worse and worse and worse. Well, the amount of ministries all began to shrink down. So the very ministry he had with Sahel Academy for Christian schooling, well, that's almost mothballed at this point. So everything gets down to less and less people available to run the ministries. Now the real question is, will the government kick us all out of the country in Niger? So that is definitely one variable. Is the security question is very mercurial. It's very fluid. It can change. A second one is theological. The second theological premise is we should really be looking for places that don't even have any missionaries at all. And we kind of had that conversation with Brian when we did a Zoom call with somebody in the Arabian Peninsula. He's saying there's a particular city where no one is yet there. So that has become also a focus of saying, maybe we should stop sending missionaries to countries that already have a church. Why don't we focus on those nations and those areas that do not have churches? So when you go to major mission conferences, the emphasis is the unreached that no one yet has touched. And that really touches us because we have a real sense of what can we do to reach the people that are the most unreached. But in a little while, I'm going to say there's really good reasons why we're not going in those areas. So there are missiological reasons, or theological reasons, if you will, and there's security-related reasons that relate to that. Now, when a civil war breaks out, like it's happening in the Congo right now, you got to get out of there. You know, when the M23 is overrunning a third of the country in the northeast, everybody has to pull out. So it can be a civil war as well that can cause this to happen. So we need a vision that keeps missionaries in. We need the church leader to be crying out to the Lord of the harvest for laborers. But where is the call and the answer going to come? And the answer is, locally people will respond for laboring, but the international church needs to respond as well. All the church needs to be involved in all of the church. And what you're going to do here is your missionary vision is going to be enlarged. You're not just missionaries in Bainbridge. You're not just missionaries in New York State. You're not just missionaries in America. Welcome to the whole world. And you have to figure out where in the whole world are we being called to specifically. And you've had direction in the past, and you need to ongoingly say to the Lord of the harvest, where is the Macedonian call to which we need to be replying? So there has to be a crying out from the church. The church internationally needs to be listening to hear what are the great needs that are happening right now. It's a very changing landscape, because if you were working, let's say, in Well, there was a point at which one of our mutual friends, he was really wanting to go into Yemen. Well, you're not going to go into Yemen. If you follow international news right now, they're being bombed. Actually, this very day, there's bombs raining down upon them. So some places you cannot just go to. You can have a burden for that place, but you cannot actually go to that place. So we respond. The global church has to respond to the call of where it is. And so the question is, do we only respond to the areas where nobody is there, or do we respond to wherever there's people being needed to be reached in every nation? You're all familiar with the phrase, the command that Jesus gave in Acts chapter 1. Be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, ends of the earth. Okay, there's two ways to look at that. One way is to say, always be at work in Jerusalem, always in Judea, always in Samaria, and always in the ends of the earth. Be active in all four phases. That's one way to look at that. And you then ask the question, what is my Jerusalem? What is my Judea? What is my Samaria? Who are the Samaritans in my world? And what does the end of the earth look like from where I am? Okay? That's one way of looking at it. There's another way of looking at it. The other way says, first do Jerusalem. When you've done that, check that box, go to Judea. When you've done that, check that box, go to Samaria. When you've done that, check that box. Well, you just have the ends of the earth as your final piece of homework. And we're in the last part. We've done the Judea part, the Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. We are in the ends of the earth. So now what we do is we kind of get out a map and say, okay, color in all the parts where missionaries have already planted a church, and where are the gray areas where nobody has yet planted anything? And so let's just look at it sequentially. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. We're down to the last part about, how much percentage can we color in and what is still left to do? That's one way, that's another way of looking at it. And this other way of looking at it has kind of really grabbed the heart and imagination of missionaries. Since 1910, the Edinburgh Conference in 1910, there was suddenly a declaration, we can reach the whole world in our generation. We can get it done. We can get the job done before Jesus Christ comes. And there's this real building on Matthew 24. Matthew 24:14 says, the gospel will be proclaimed where? In the whole world, and then the end will come. You remember that verse? So the idea there is, we should be out there really filling in those spaces that haven't been filled in, because Jesus is patiently waiting for us to get every little part colored in, and then the end will come. Here's the difficulty. The parts that aren't colored in are huge. Secondly, parts that were previously colored in, well, you might say we're losing the paint there. We're having areas that were once quite Christian, and now the amount of non-Christians in those areas is growing. I'll illustrate from Toronto. I think Toronto's in that direction, right? You've been to Toronto. Have you ever noticed how multicultural that city is? It's staggering. Toronto, that Christine's grandparents lived in, was so Protestant that it was considered the most Protestant city in the world. It was filled with churches. There was all sorts of ministries. They were involved in ministry to the poor. They were helping out. And then came about the year 1960, when a need for new workers was needed, and they opened up their borders to Italians and Greeks and Portuguese and so forth. Today, if you go there, Toronto is a mission field. Notice what happened. It once was the most Protestant, most Christian city in North America. They used to hold major Christian conferences in Toronto because it was so Christian. It was such a Christian city. Today, it's more like Mellonville, where you have a scattering of churches, particularly in the downtown area. There's just a scattering of churches left. And most of Christianity has moved into the subdivisions or out into what we call cottage country in Canada. Do you see what's happening? The field changes. The Toronto of 1960 is not the Toronto of 2025. The Toronto of 1960 was a reached, engaged, fully Christian city. Fast forward, 2025, we have a mission field on our hands. And so we have to constantly be reevaluating, where are the unreached? And we can't just sort of say, well, Canada's done. Canada is reformulating itself into a massive mission field. You can take New York City as another example. Or you can go with me to Europe, to Amsterdam. Amsterdam was such a Christian city that all the political leaders in the city used to preach regularly on Sunday in the pulpits. Can you imagine? Have you ever been to Amsterdam? You know what Amsterdam is known for? Prostitution. It's it's the most It's the most crime-plagued, prostitution-filled city in the world. And yet 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, it was considered the most Christian city in Europe. What happened? Your population changes. The unreached can suddenly rebound in an incredible way in cities that we should be very hesitant to check any area off. The unreached is a growing phenomenon. Let me just pause here and say, are there any questions at this point? Yes, Kyle.
Curious to hear, how have you seen that theological idea play out in such a way that missionaries don't get sent where they might have in the past? Where people are saying, we filled in that area, so we don't need to send them anymore.
Yeah.
What does that look like practically?
Well, the most practical way we're looking at it we see two things happening. Yeah, if you could repeat the question, please.
Say it over your mic.
Oh, well, I was hoping you would re-say it. So is there another mic? Maybe we need a roaming mic.
I actually have one.
Okay.
If I can find it. Are we on? Okay, my question was, if your theology says whenever a place is reached, stop sending
Yes.
gospel workers there, do you have an example of how you've seen that happen?
Christine?
One, to follow up on Benjamin's earlier example.
Just stand up, yes.
In Benin, he was just saying that when we first went in 1990, there were 75 adult missionaries now.
With our mission.
With our mission
Just with our
only.
mission, yeah.
The dynamic is that those missionaries and missionaries who came end up leaving for various reasons. The kids are getting old, they need education, we retire because of age.
Right.
But the issue is the vision of the sending churches, even the vision of the mission itself,
Yes.
and the field mission are losing the vision to replace those missionaries. So
Yes.
because it's like, for us to come back and recruit missionaries to go to Benin, we have to have this sense that, no, there's still a need there, a passion, because people don't leave everything behind to go to serve the Lord somewhere without a sense of God's calling and a passion to meet a need. But that passion
Yeah.
in the sending churches, even in the mission, even in the local mission, has been challenged.
Because when the missionaries stop coming, and what have they heard from their own mission agencies? Well, that's an old pioneer field, that's an old mission field. We're moved on from Togo, from Benin. We moved on. We're now onto unreached areas. Well, the message gets back to the church. If the missionaries aren't going to be working in that area, neither are we. So we can look at Benin and see massive pockets where Christianity has not yet at all established itself, particularly in the north. And the response of the church is, we're competing with the churches in the south. And you're going, no, where did they get the idea from that it's not a critically urgent important? And the thing is, and my suspicion is, Kyle, they learned it from us. If we can say, job done, move on, they can also say, job done, move on. So when I was speaking in particular with our director, Lee Phillips, we have a lot of conversations about that. And I said, Lee, I said, Lee, where are the new people coming alongside of the church to work in there? He sort of said, I plead with them, but they're all saying, you're a legacy field, they call us now. You're a legacy field. And it's like, no, we're not. Like the Bantanu people that I work with in northern Benin, there is such an incredible capacity now to reach them. They are so open and accessible. Muslims. Where in the world do you have Muslims open to the gospel? And not a lot of places. So where they are open, wouldn't you send your workers in alongside of the church? And it's not happening. Why? Because they checked off the box, we've done that country. We got a 40% Christianity, time to move on. And I'm thinking, we can't. It never stops. In fact, it's a growing work. It's not a diminishing task, it's actually a growing task. As you can see, I'm pretty passionate about this. I've been jumping all over my notes here. There is a reason, there's a sobering reason why certain parts of the world are unreached. You cannot just go to China. You cannot get a visa as a mission worker in India. When you start to look at the countries where missionaries are being said no, refuse, or even their local evangelists can have the freedom to preach the gospel, it's a shrinking phenomenon. The number of areas where you can preach and fully declare the gospel is decreasing. So the world is becoming more and more unreached by virtue of the fact that our workers cannot go to many countries of the world. So we're not near the end where we can check the box and say the whole world is heard. We're just down to a few more little areas. Jesus is coming, hallelujah, Maranatha. We can't do that. We don't know when Christ is returning, and the mission labor is actually increasing. We need to allow God to decide where we can go and cannot go. We're supposed to go where we do, proclaim the gospel. If they reject, we wipe the dust off our feet and we put it back into God's sovereign hands. Paul and Timothy at one point were traveling through what's now called Turkey, and the Holy Spirit forbid them to go to another region. Are those people not important? Yes, but in God's sovereign, inscrutable ways, that area is not yet ready for the gospel. He knows the time when they should come in. So the real question is, which areas are accessible to us and which areas are no longer accessible? Where the Kaufmans and the Cherries work is no longer an accessible region. If you're familiar with cities, the limit now is Kandy. You can work up to Kandy, but you cannot work beyond Kandy. You cannot even go to Simperu anymore because that's considered a dangerous area for expatriates. So the question is, what are we doing in the area that is still open and accessible to us? And not check off the box and said, well, there's enough Christianity in that country, they can look after that. A good, healthy view of the church, which we use the word ecclesiology, a good, healthy view of the church is that you are passionate about being a local member. You have a relationship with other churches in your country. We'll call that the national or regional identity. But that you also have a global international identity. And I would say that that's the maturity that we're looking for in even individual members, that you are passionate about whatever God's doing in the church, passionate about what God's doing in the land, and yes, passionate about what God is doing internationally. That's a healthy ecclesiology, as we call that. Why do I say that? Because the church we have planted in Benin only reaches 2 levels, not 3. They don't have an international vision in the churches in Benin. We did not plant that. We put so much emphasis on the local church in the country, and the church in the country, and the church in the country. We really built up a church. We got close to 1,000 churches who have no vision beyond their borders, who do not want to go outside of the country other than to get money. Christine.
Part of that is just identity. Not only do they not have the vision to send, but they don't even think of themselves as global Christians.
No.
And they kind of feel isolated, like their whole focus is on their country, reaching their country. But they don't really even reach to have fellowship from other Christians in even their neighboring countries. And when their neighboring countries are in need, they don't have the vision to reach out and help them. They're Beninese Christian church.
And that's it, period. That, like, they stop there and we're thinking, oh shoot, you mustn't let your identity stop just at the national
But
level.
Christ Church is global.
It is.
We're not just a Bainbridge church. And God has we're a part of the body of Christ, and the body of Christ is global.
Prior to 2014, Christine and I and others, and I don't know if you did as well, we would go to Burkina Faso. Did you guys ever go to Burkina Faso? Yeah. You could drive over there, beautiful country, lovely people and all of that. That world is gone because the jihadists took over the countryside in 2014. And I remember saying to our church, our mission director, what is our church here doing for our sister church in Burkina Faso? Because the numbers were staggering. 150 churches have been burned down. Whole villages have been wiped out. Pastors are fleeing in different areas. There's refugee ministries popping up in Ouagadougou. Wow, has Burkina Faso ever changed? And I said, and what are the sisters' churches doing? He says, that's a great question. Let me get in contact with Burkina Faso. He does. The church is there saying, we would love to talk together with the church leaders in Benin. This is the response. The church leader in Benin said, we got more important things to do than that. We're too busy working on the churches here in Benin. I'm sorry. Even though the flight was being offered to be paid for, he said, I'm sorry, that's not on my agenda. That's the church we planted. In other words, oh no, what have we done? What have we done that their identity stops at the border? That they can't see beyond and can't even see a sister work happening in Burkina Faso. And I'm saying, and when the crisis hits you in Benin and you cry out for help, who's going to hear you? It's a bit like the wolf parable, you know. You've made yourself insensitive to the crisis in other nations. You don't have a global identity as a Christian. And when the crisis hits you, who's going to respond? Who's going to respond? I take great comfort from Paul, because Paul is an example in missions. Did you notice that Paul, when he plants a church, revisits it, sends people back, writes the church, and that's why we have the epistles? He doesn't leave the job. The task is always before him. He's willing to go back. He sends the workers back. Timothy picks up on the model. He does the same thing. Titus does the same thing. And then eventually the bishops that take over the role of the leadership in the early church, they do the same thing. They never stop visiting and revisiting the work where they are. That's what I'm asking churches to do here. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. Stay on the job. Stay on the job. This is not a house to be built and walk away. This is like a hospital to be planted that needs to be continuously refueled with new involvement. So there's 4 corrections that I am asking for in our mission circles. Can we stop referring to certain fields as second class, old mission fields, or even legacy fields? Can we stop that conversation, please? Can we stop classifying them as checked off, done, versus haven't done yet, will do? Those are very unhelpful categories. The mission field just stays new all the time. The Great Commission does not have a term limit. There's no sort of like a time expiry date on a mission activity. It's not just a chapter in church history. No, it's an ever ongoing burden. So I'm really saying, when you remember the first vision where Carl was carrying everything by himself and that he had handed the whole thing over to David, I'm saying, can we please not go there? Can we please stay at the model where we always see 2 people carrying the load of missions? That there will always be a local, national responsibility in leadership, and there will always be, picture, someone carrying the load with them. It was never meant for one shoulder. It was meant for the shoulders of 2 people. Can we also please remove the guilt that we haven't somehow done our job? Whether or not places are accessible and open to us is God's domain. That's His decision. When will we reach Yemen? We don't know. One of our former students is in Oman. Oman, you can work in there, but you can't work in Yemen. When is that? That's God's domain. We pray, and we know people who intensely pray for this area, but it's God who decides which regions are accessible. The inaccessible belong to God, but the accessible belongs to the church. Let's have that conversation of, have we begun a work and are we still staying to keep the flame alive there? Are there new areas that are now accessible to us that formerly were not? Some of you are old enough to remember the tsunami, I think it was 2004, that happened in Indonesia. Did you know that that area that got most hit was the most Islamic resistant area of the whole Indonesian archipelago? It was just the most resistant, the Aceh province. When the tsunami hit them and flattened out, you remember those pictures of completely flattened out villages? For the first time, missionaries were allowed in to help alongside, like Samaritan Purse and many others. God has His time. When it becomes accessible, let's move in. When it becomes inaccessible, let's step back and pray. That is simply part of what it's going to look like, in my opinion, until the Lord Jesus Christ returns. And the other thing is, can we look at our Samarias? There are a lot of migrant communities that are repopulating the world map. America is going to be filled with minority pockets, and it already is, you might say, but it's going to continue. Can we be there for, do you have minority migrants here in the city? Not in Bainbridge, eh? Yes, in Binghamton you have. So can we look at those? Your Samaritans, the Samaritan factor is always in every nation. In every nation. Can we look at that? Where are those pockets developing where, let's say, the Somalis are all coming together in one place? Can we look at that, please? And can we not feel guilty about the areas that we can't reach because of God's sovereignty? And finally, just to close off this particular session, can we have a vision of the church that says, I'm a local member, I'm a national member, I'm an international member. I think locally, I think regionally, I think globally. Because there's some things that the local church just can't do by itself. You need to be national. And there's some things we can't do even just within the nation. We have to go international. And so I invite you to revisit your vision of missions. I invite you to hold up the brightest possible flame of two shoulders carrying the load together, not just one shoulder in each country. Okay, let me just, last few minutes, let me see if there are any clarifications that I can offer or questions that I can answer. Or if you want to push back, let's see what that looks like. Yes?
Another question I had in regards to maybe like the security risks that most Western nations would have to go into different countries. Do you see the international church in other areas being able to send missionaries to places that maybe they don't have as high a risk, or is it globally Christianity as a whole really hindering or being persecuted in those regions, so it doesn't matter what nationality you're from?
Yeah, and the answer is yes, 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 yes. You're going to have places where it doesn't matter what expression you are, you're going to be persecuted. North Korea usually comes to the top of the list. Eritrea is on that list as well. Somalia, Yemen. That doesn't matter what you are, you're just going to be persecuted, whether you're national, international, or even of your own tribe. Others are less so severe. Some areas, Christianity is actually flourishing underground, like in Iran. We've all by now heard of what remarkable things that God is doing. Thank God we can't measure it. Let God be God. You know, He's working on that. It's just staggering when the whole lid comes off Iran, or whenever that happens, we are going to just be amazed at what God has done. But then we should also come alongside of those works, because once they come out of persecution, they have to grow into kind of visible churches. And what's that going to look like? Well, please, International Church, here they're praying to the Lord of the harvest for help. Let's just be there for them. So it changes from country to country. And not only that, it can change within a country within a 20-year period. Burkina Faso is an illustration of that. So I just got a letter yesterday from Burkina Faso from somebody who worked with the Fulanis in the bush. You can't do that anymore. He's now working in Ouagadougou in the city with a sports ministry. I say, praise God. Still there, just a different role. He's still there, but with a different role. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes.
Thank you very much for sharing. It's interesting, you're probably very familiar with the problem of dependency, because this is so different from a lot of the things I've heard, and the problem of, especially in some countries, where the nationals don't take ownership.
Yes.
And everything depends on the expats.
Yep.
And how that corresponds
Yep.
to what you're sharing.
Yep. Yeah, and we had this conversation last night for 2 hours or something like that. I mean, we missionaries talk about this all the time. And money, it can be a blessing and a curse. And when it turns into, and let me use the heavy word curse, when it turns into a real problem issue, we need to find a solution that doesn't say, oh, I'm just going to leave the country altogether. That's not the solution, because they can hunt you down with a cell phone. You know, this thing called WhatsApp. And so you've got to find a rhythm in saying, yes, I'm going to help, but not on the terms that you are dictating. I'm going to try to follow Scripture on the way I help. And no, I will not let you play on the guilt card that you white rich people in America owe us money. Forget that. Forget that. I'm not going to. You're not going to be using guilt arguments. So we have to have those conversations. Sometimes person to person. We have to aim for the higher ground of not developing dependency. And where we need to be cutting that. And in our own mission in SIM, we've done a lot of trimming, and it hurts. Sometimes they're pretty upset at you. You know, like, well, you used to help us financially. And I said, yep, God has given us a new assignment. And we're there, but not in the financial way that you are asking. It was very painful. Last week, I got an email from the director in Benin and said, Benjamin, the president of the whole denomination just came in to have a special meeting with me, and he wants to go overseas. And the reason he wants to go overseas is because he's looking for, fill in the blank, money. He says he wants you to pay for the flight, set up an agenda for him to visit different churches so that the churches can give him money for his bigger building projects that are going on back in Benin. He said, I don't think that fits your vision of an international engagement. And I said, not at all. That's painful. And so you see him going beyond his border, but he's got one thing in mind. Can you, other people, can you please just give me cash? And I'm thinking, that's not the answer. That is not the answer. Anyone else? Christine.
We find ourselves trying to look at a picture where the focus moves away from finances to ministry, walking hand in hand, having a vision for God's love for the people, and to be able to do that side by side, rather than, I mean, yes, finances are involved, but to progressively be seeing them take more responsibility for the finances that are involved in the ministry, but not to cut off the relationship because of finances. We really need, we long to be able to minister side by side.
Yeah.
To reach.
And we respond to every need. When needs do emerge amongst them, they have a baby is born or something like that. And what they do in Benin is if a mother gives birth, people come with money. They say, you got to pay the hospital bill. You know, there is no social insurance there. So people immediately pitch in and help in, and we missionaries should really be doing that as well. But when they come along and said, we have this big, massive project, and would you be the patron that pays for it, we have to say, there's a problem here. We're going to help in some way, but not in that way. Not in that way. I see the herd moving. So why don't we land the airplane right here?
Thank you so much. Lots to think about, pray about, and just ask the Lord what does it look like for us as individuals and as a congregation to develop and grow this vision and be part of how God is building his kingdom through us. So let's take a quick break, and we'll gather back in 10 minutes for our main service.